The day before they fired me, I was fixing the damn espresso machine in the break room. Not because it was in my job description. Hell no. But because the new HR assistant, the one who once sent her DoorDash order to the entire company mailing list, couldn't figure out how to unclog the milk frother. So there I was, in a $20 blazer from Ross, sleeves rolled up, scraping dried coffee sludge from a stainless steel pipe like some caffeine-addled janitor. Right then, the new CEO, Blake Foster, strutted by with his Bluetooth headset dangling like a status symbol and muttered, "Can we get facilities to handle that?" I didn't even look up. If I had, I might have hurled a coffee pot at that perfect haircut of his and walked out for good. But I didn't. I fixed it, because that's what I'd always done. Quietly, efficiently, without applause or complaint. I'd been Lydia Carter before Slack, before rooftop happy hours, before any of these people could spell scalability. Back when the company was just 4 desks jammed in a rented space next to a vape shop, I ran everything: inventory, payroll, vendor contracts, onboarding. When they offered me stock options back in 2001, I didn't laugh them off like the interns do now. I read the fine print, signed with a cheap pen, and tucked those certificates into my fireproof box next to my birth certificate and an old wedding ring. Most early employees cashed out after Series B when we moved into the glossy downtown office. Not me. I held on to mine, not because I was smart, because I forgot they existed. By the time I remembered, they weren't worth selling, but they weren't worthless either. Fast forward to now. Leadership had changed 3 times in 4 years. Suddenly, everyone was talking about disrupting legacy frameworks without knowing why those frameworks existed. Blake was the 3rd CEO since the founder left. Slick hair, slicker words, all charm, and MBA buzzwords. He called me Linda for 2 weeks, then Lauren, then stopped addressing me altogether. I wasn't surprised when my seat in strategy meetings disappeared, or when my ops team got reassigned under global process management. I wasn't even shocked when he took credit for a vendor workflow I'd built 10 years ago that saved 40% in processing time. What did surprise me was the company newsletter that hit my inbox one Tuesday morning. Strategic Evolution, preparing for our next chapter. It was PR code for acquisition. $150 million from a private equity firm, pending board and shareholder approval. Huge payday for Blake and his entourage. Big headlines, new logo, shiny slogan like empowering the future of data. My 20 years reduced to 1 sentence. Operations will be transitioned under the incoming COO. That was how I learned I was already gone. But anger didn't come right away. I just printed the newsletter, folded it neatly, and slipped it into that same fireproof box behind the stock papers. Something told me to keep it. 2 days later came the alignment chat. Calendar invite at 4:57 p.m. on a Friday. No agenda. Lowercase subject line like a bad text. I almost skipped it. Probably another fake team bonding thing. But that good soldier reflex kicked in. So I went. Blake was already there when I walked into conference room B, sitting back like a Netflix villain. Beside him was Jenna, HR's parrot, holding a manila folder like it was radioactive. "Lydia," Blake began, with that hostage negotiator warmth, "we appreciate everything you've done. 20 years. That's a lifetime." He nudged the folder toward me. "We're just streamlining operations. It's not personal. Inside, termination letter, NDA, Cobra info, severance, and a shareholder rights waiver." I frowned. "This clause," I said quietly, tapping it, "this isn't standard." He gave that fake laugh. "Legal insists. It's symbolic. Those shares wouldn't buy lunch now." "We're doing you a favor, honestly." Jenna giggled like it was true. I studied the page. I'd seen hundreds of contracts in my life. This one wasn't casual. It wasn't about closure. It was about fear. "I'll need time to review," I said. "Of course," Blake replied smoothly. Just get it signed by Monday. I closed the folder, slid it back to him. I won't be signing anything today, I said. And from now on, please communicate through counsel. Silence. Jenna froze. Blake blinked like the teleprompter cut off mid-speech. By the time I reached the parking garage, the numbness was gone, replaced by that low hum that always means something's wrong. That waiver wasn't symbolic. It was desperate, and desperation leaves a paper trail. When I got home, I went straight to the closet, pulled out my fireproof box, and stared at those old papers I'd nearly forgotten existed. If Blake wanted that signature so badly, I needed to know why. I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, the fireproof box open like a time capsule from a past life. Paper, real paper, filled the air with that faint smell of toner and old ambition. Stock certificates, early memos, board minutes, email printouts from the AOL era. I hadn't touched any of it in years. The clasp on the box still stuck like it was guarding secrets. I started sorting through it all, hands trembling slightly from a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. There they were, my original option grants from 2001, 2003, 2005, the foundation years, when we still brought our own coffee and borrowed folding chairs from the landlord. Back when nobody thought we'd survive long enough to worry about mergers or stock splits. At first, I didn't know what I was looking for, just that I had to find it. The waiver Blake tried to slip past me. It wasn't random. I knew how legal documents worked, knew when language was meant to hide something. I dug deeper and found a folder labeled Q2 Board Addendum 2006, my own handwriting across the top. Inside, a memo from the old CFO, a Danish guy named Henrik. He'd been paranoid about hostile takeovers and insisted on adding a protection clause for early shareholders. Minority veto rights, it read. Any shareholder, or group of shareholders, holding a certain threshold percentage of Class A stock could block material corporate transactions, mergers, acquisitions, or liquidations, unless they explicitly waived that right in writing. I stared at that paragraph until the words started swimming. My stake back then had been tiny, 0.5% maybe, but Henrik's math had accounted for attrition. What would happen if other early shareholders sold out or left? Most of them had. Some took buyouts, others let their rights lapse when they left the company. But me? I never sold, never signed anything, never transferred. I just kept them, which meant the dilution math had changed over time. I grabbed a notepad, started sketching numbers, percentages, and dates like a detective in a cold case room. Every sale, every expired proxy, every forfeited option from those early employees, they all tilted the scale. By 5 a.m., my floor looked like a crime scene made of spreadsheets. And then it hit me. My current holdings, adjusted for the vanished shares, nudged just over the threshold in that old clause. Barely, but enough. Enough to trigger veto power over any major transaction, including Blake's precious $150 million merger. My coffee went cold before I noticed. I leaned back against the couch, heart pounding. Blake hadn't been trying to tidy up paperwork. He'd been trying to erase an obstacle. Me. I could picture him now, sitting in some glass-walled office, smug grin, thinking he'd eliminated the last loose end. He probably didn't even realize the clause still existed. The lawyers must have flagged it. Someone always does. And that's why he'd buried the waiver inside my termination packet. They needed my signature because the merger couldn't close without unanimous legacy consent. And as long as I held those shares and that clause was valid, I was a gatekeeper. For a moment, I laughed. A small, sharp sound in the quiet apartment. After 2 decades of being ignored, underestimated, talked over, suddenly, I mattered more than I ever had. I thought about all the years I'd been the dependable one, the one who fixed broken workflows, mediated petty fights, remembered birthdays. And now, apparently, I was the one person standing between them and a multi-million-dollar payday. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me calm, clear, the kind of calm that comes after you stop being afraid of losing what's already gone. I didn't need revenge. I needed leverage. And I had it. By sunrise, I'd gathered every document that proved my shareholder status, slipped them into fresh folders, and poured another cup of bitter coffee. My reflection in the dark window looked like someone I hadn't seen in years. Steady, deliberate, unshakable. If Blake Foster wanted to call my shares worthless, fine. He'd find out soon enough how expensive worthless could be. The first email from HR came Monday at 9:02 a.m. Subject line: gentle reminder, exit package review. Nothing gentle about it. The second arrived before lunch. This one from someone in legal I'd never met, hinting that delays could complicate pending corporate actions. Translation: sign the damn waiver. I didn't respond to either. I just smiled, opened my new folder, and underlined one phrase in red ink: Minority Veto Rights, 2006 Amendment. It was time to let them sweat. By Tuesday, Blake had stopped hiding behind HR emails. My phone lit up just after noon while I was microwaving leftover lasagna. His name flashed across the screen. For a second, I thought about letting it ring, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear how a man like Blake sounded when he realized he didn't control the room anymore. "Lydia," he said, all forced cheer. "Just wanted to check in. Maybe there's been some confusion about the documents?" I took a bite of lasagna. "No confusion," I said flatly. Silence stretched, the kind that makes insecure men fidget. "Transitions can be hard," he finally said, tone dipping toward threat. "Dragging this out won't help anyone, especially you. You don't want this to turn into a legal issue." He still thought he was the one holding the knife. "I'm not dragging anything," I replied. "I'm reviewing thoroughly." He chuckled. "Come on, Lydia. Those shares don't mean anything anymore." I let the quiet hang like a weight. "Anyway," he added quickly, "if you want to save yourself some trouble, let's wrap this up soon. Don't burn bridges." I ended the call mid-sentence. He followed up with a text 5 minutes later. "Let's be adults about this." I blocked his number. By Wednesday, the smear campaign had begun. A former colleague sent me screenshots from the company Slack. Someone from sales was asking what I even did all day. Another thread speculated I'd been offboarded for performance misalignment. I almost laughed. Corporate euphemisms were an art form. So many ways to say we wanted her gone. The line that really got me was one junior analyst's comment. She didn't even cry when they told her. Just left like it didn't matter. Funny thing, if I had cried, they'd call me unstable. If I'd shouted, I'd be bitter. Staying calm? That made me robotic. The only winning move was silence, so I kept it. Except with one person. Thursday morning, I walked into a tiny law office above a nail salon in a strip mall 2 blocks from my apartment. The woman sitting behind the desk didn't waste words. Nina Ross, corporate law, 22 years. Her office smelled faintly of lemon polish and quiet vengeance. She had silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of posture that made you instinctively confess your sins. I handed her the folder I'd built from my midnight archaeology session. She flipped through it once, paused at the 2006 amendment, and said calmly, "They're screwed." That was it. No drama. No speech. Just fact. "Do nothing unless I tell you," she said. "They'll panic first. Let them." And panic they did. By Friday, the emails were coming faster, longer, more aggressive. One from legal claimed my failure to engage could be seen as bad faith. Nina drafted a reply that was just 2 sentences long. "Ms. Carter has not waived any rights. Further communication should be directed to counsel." We sent it and waited. Somewhere in that glossy downtown tower, Blake was probably pacing, refreshing his inbox, wondering how the woman who used to refill toner cartridges suddenly had a lawyer with teeth. He didn't know yet what I knew, that the clause wasn't just legal jargon, it was dynamite, and he'd already lit the fuse by trying to bury it. The first spark came from a place he'd never expect, an overworked junior associate at the acquiring firm. Her name was Harper Lane, and she had the kind of detail-oriented paranoia that makes young lawyers both invaluable and miserable. She was reviewing the shareholder ledger, probably a spreadsheet longer than the Constitution, when she spotted the discrepancy. One Carter, Lydia E., listed as Class A shareholder, no proxy on file, no waiver, no consent. The merger documents, now in version 8, assumed unanimous legacy consent had been obtained. Harper double-checked, then triple-checked, flagged it for her senior counsel. That's when things began to unravel. By 3:00 p.m., an emergency call was happening between Blake, the CFO, their internal legal director, and 2 lawyers from the acquiring firm. I wasn't there, of course, but Nina was looped in by someone who owed her a favor. From what she later told me, it went something like this. Blake tried to laugh it off. "Oh, Lydia, she's gone. We've got her paperwork, probably just not processed yet." But their legal rep replied, voice flat. "We've reviewed the documents. There's no waiver, no proxy, nothing to revoke her rights." Silence. Then the CFO, nervous as a cat, asked, "What does that mean?" The acquiring firm's counsel answered, "It means your entire deal depends on a shareholder who still holds veto authority, and she hasn't signed off." For the first time in 20 years, the balance of power tilted. And for once, it tilted toward me. By Monday morning, you could practically smell the desperation coming through their emails. Blake must have thought hitting send at 6:12 a.m. would make him look proactive instead of terrified. Subject line: clarification and closure opportunity. The kind of title that screams panic disguised as professionalism. The message started with fake sincerity. "I hope this note finds you well during this time of transition." Like he was consoling me for a goldfish funeral. Then came the guilt trip. "We're disappointed by your lack of engagement. It's important we all act in the company's best interest." And finally, the veiled threat. "There may be consequences for withholding consent in a manner deemed obstructionist." That was the word he landed on. Obstructionist. After 20 years of loyalty, of building systems that kept their lights on, I was now a speed bump. The email ended with, "Let's resolve this amicably and professionally before we're forced to consider more formal action." I didn't reply. Nina did. 5 words. "Our client declines to respond further." That afternoon, the CFO tried a new angle. He called Nina directly. A last-ditch reasonable man play. His tone was syrupy. "Look, we're just trying to keep this clean," he said. Then he offered what he called a transition consulting bonus. Translation: hush money. It was a 6-figure number, generous enough to make most people fold. Nina didn't even blink. She put him on speaker so I could hear. "Let me be clear," she said. "My client doesn't accept hush money. She's not here to make this easy. She's here to ensure her rights are respected." There was a pause so thick you could almost hear the CFO sweating. He tried the guilt card next. "Lydia always supported the company. This is her legacy too, isn't it?" I unmuted just long enough to say, "Tell him I supported the company, not the clowns who hijacked it." Then I clicked off. That night, a final offer came from HR. The header in bold red font read, "Final notice. Offer expires in 48 hours." The waiver was attached again. The number had gone up slightly, as if that would buy compliance. They still didn't get it. It wasn't about money. It was about dignity. About watching a company I'd helped build turn into a feeding frenzy for people who spoke in buzzwords and treated employees like outdated software. They thought they could write me out quietly, but I wasn't going to be erased in fine print. By Thursday, an emergency board meeting was called. The invite subject line was sterile: shareholder item review and resolution. Everyone knew exactly what it meant. It meant me. They booked the big conference room, the one with the skyline view and the walnut table polished within an inch of its life. I arrived at 8:59 sharp. No theatrics, no preamble. Just quiet heels against tile. Nina walked beside me, calm as ever, carrying a black folder. She didn't even look at Blake when we entered. He was already seated at the head of the table, tie loosened, like a man pretending he wasn't cornered. The CFO sat stiffly to his right, tapping a pen so hard it could have cracked glass. Across from them were two representatives from the private equity firm, both stone-faced. The kind of men who smell weakness like sharks smell blood. Nina didn't say a word. She walked to the end of the table, slid the black folder in front of the acquiring firm's senior counsel, and stepped back. Inside was everything. My original equity certificates, signed and sealed, shareholder minutes acknowledging my Class A status, and, most importantly, the notarized 2006 amendment showing my voting threshold still valid. Blake tried to smile, voice tight. "This seems unnecessary," he said. "We're just here to clarify." One of the PE lawyers flipped through the pages, stopped midway, and asked Nina, "Is this everything?" She nodded once. "Everything that matters." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. You could feel the oxygen leaving the room as the realization sank in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning. The PE counsel turned to Blake. "Why wasn't this disclosed during due diligence?" Blake's voice cracked. We assumed she was a non-factor. The shares, she's not employed anymore." Nina cut in, cold as glass. "She's not an employee," she said. "She's a shareholder. You stripped her of titles, not her power." That line landed like a hammer. The CFO looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. One of the PE reps leaned forward. "You told us you had unanimous consent from all legacy shareholders," he said. "You don't. That's a material misrepresentation." And just like that, the entire $150 million deal froze midair. The word "frozen" hit the table like a verdict. The senior counsel from the acquiring firm said it calmly, almost clinically, but the effect was nuclear. "Until this is resolved, the merger is frozen." Blake's mouth twitched. The CFO went pale. One of the board members let out a sigh that sounded like 20 years of stock options evaporating. I didn't gloat. I didn't move. I just stood there, hands clasped, watching them realize the gravity of a document they'd probably skimmed 15 years ago. The silence stretched until even the hum of the HVAC felt accusatory. The acquiring firm's general counsel, a woman named Elaine Aldridge, was the next to speak. She had a calm voice, the kind people use to announce layoffs or verdicts. "We've reviewed Ms. Carter's shareholder documentation. She currently holds 3.18% of the active Class A shares. Per the 2006 shareholder amendment, any Class A holder with 2.75% or greater retains veto authority over material corporate actions, including mergers." She closed the folder. "Ms. Carter has not waived that right. Therefore, this transaction cannot legally proceed without her written consent." Blake leaned forward, face flushed. "Okay, but she's not part of the company anymore," he sputtered. "She's residual." The word slipped out like an insult, but Elaine didn't flinch. "She's not an employee," she replied evenly. "She's a shareholder. That distinction is critical." Blake tried again, words tumbling over themselves. "She's not aligned with our vision anymore. How can we let a single obsolete stakeholder derail a $150 million deal?" The CFO, who'd been avoiding eye contact for the entire meeting, quietly muttered, "Because she can." Elaine tilted her head. "You made her more powerful when you fired her," she said. You could feel the sentence slice through the air. By removing her operational role, you severed her fiduciary duty to act in the company's best interest. She's now free to act solely in her own interest. You gave her that freedom. For the first time, Blake looked scared. Not angry, not defensive, but genuinely terrified. He looked at me like I was a ghost he'd buried, and suddenly found standing in his boardroom. "You're saying," he stammered, "she can hold this deal hostage because we let her go?" Elaine didn't blink. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." The older of the two private equity reps, a silver-haired man with an immaculate tie, finally spoke. "We relied on your due diligence," he said slowly, his tone icy. "You misrepresented the cap table. That's not just a clerical error, that's a breach of trust." Blake's jaw worked soundlessly. For a brief, pathetic second, I thought he might cry, not out of guilt, but because he'd just watched his 7-figure bonus evaporate. He turned to me, desperate now. "Lydia," he said, voice pitching up like we were old friends. "Come on, you don't want to blow the whole thing up. Be reasonable." I met his eyes, steady. "Define reasonable," I said. "Was it reasonable when you told me I couldn't attend ops meetings because the room was full? Or when you gave my team to your pet project manager so he could add leadership visibility? Or when you called me Linda in front of the board?" His face twisted. "You treated me like I didn't exist," I continued quietly. "Now I don't. Not in your structure, not in your hierarchy. But on your cap table? I'm very much alive." The board chair, a gray-haired man who'd been silent through the chaos, finally leaned forward. "What do you want, Miss Carter?" His tone wasn't hostile. It was respectful. A question from one equal to another. I looked down at the stack of papers in front of me. Nina had prepared a 1-page memo outlining everything I was about to ask for. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd built an empire on speed and disruption, but all it took was one forgotten clause and one quiet woman they thought was disposable to bring it all to a halt. I didn't want revenge. I wanted correction, precision, a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I took a breath. "Let's talk about terms." Nina slid the single-page memo across the table toward the board chair. The paper made a soft sound, but in that sterile room it was thunder. "These are Ms. Carter's terms," she said evenly. "No threats, no performance, just business." The chair unfolded the sheet, and everyone in that walnut-paneled chamber leaned forward as though the paper itself might explode. The first line was simple. Revision of payout structure to include a dedicated tranche for legacy shareholders. It wasn't just for me. There were a few others. Old names buried deep in payroll archives. People who'd built this place when it was held together by duct tape and goodwill. If this company was going to be reborn under private equity, it would do so without erasing its own bones. The second condition hit harder. Immediate cancellation of CEO Blake Foster's golden parachute and any associated post-merger bonuses. The CFO audibly swallowed. Blake's eyes went wide, and the red crept up his neck like a rising tide. He started to protest, voice cracking. "Absolutely not. You're asking me to throw myself under the bus." I didn't flinch. "No one asked you to stand in the road," I said. Nina didn't even look at him. She was watching the board chair, who was already scanning the next line. The third condition was almost poetic in its simplicity. A formal board-issued statement acknowledging Ms. Carter's 2 decades of contribution and confirming that her departure was not performance-based, disciplinary, or voluntary. It wasn't about vanity, it was about narrative, About making sure my story couldn't be rewritten by someone with a louder microphone and a shorter memory. Blake let out a strangled laugh, trying to rally. "This is extortion," he snapped. "She's blackmailing her own company." Nina steepled her fingers, calm as a storm at sea. "No, Mr. Foster. She's negotiating as a shareholder. You made that distinction yourself, remember?" The words landed clean, precise, final. Blake turned to the board chair, desperate. "You can't just—" he started, but the older man raised a hand. "We're not just doing anything, Blake. We're reading." The chair passed the memo to the private equity reps. The older one, the silver-haired shark, read it once, then again, and turned to his colleague. "This is doable," he said simply. That single sentence cracked the air like a whip. Blake's composure shattered. "Doable?" he barked. "You can't just cave to her. She's hijacking the deal." The CFO leaned back, eyes still on the paper. "She's protecting her stake," he murmured. "You should have done your homework. You realize what precedent this sets?" Blake said, voice trembling between anger and panic. "We're letting a former operations manager rewrite the terms of a $150 million transaction." The CFO looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who's missed the obvious. "It's this or nothing," he said flatly. You could almost hear the sound of Blake's ego fracturing. He stared at me like I was a glitch in his perfect algorithm, a variable he couldn't code around. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just met his eyes with the same quiet neutrality I'd worn through every condescending meeting and empty pep talk. Elaine Aldridge, the PE counsel, tapped her pen once against the table. "We'll move forward with these revisions," she said. And that was that. No applause, no ceremony. Just the sound of power shifting from one hand to another. Nina handed me the fresh copy of the merger approval form, now updated with the new legacy compensation clause. Blake's bonus redacted in bold, and my name formally cleared in the record. I signed it, one clean, deliberate stroke. Then I stood, gathering my folder, straightened my jacket, and turned toward Blake. His face was the color of printer jam. "Good luck cashing your bonus," I said softly. The words hit harder than any shout could have. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out, heels steady against the polished floor, the city skyline glaring through the glass behind me. No applause, no validation. I didn't need any. I had what I came for, my dignity, my proof, and the claws they'd tried to bury but couldn't kill. The next morning, my inbox was a battlefield. News outlets were already picking up the story. Merger delayed pending shareholder review. The company's PR team scrambled, releasing a statement full of empty optimism about internal alignment and transparency. Translation: they were bleeding and trying to smile through it. I didn't respond to reporters. I didn't need to. The documents spoke louder than any quote ever could. By noon, Blake's name had disappeared from the company website's leadership page. The official statement called it a strategic leadership transition. I'd seen that phrase before. It was HR speak for "you're done." The board had voted him out late the previous night, according to Nina. His golden parachute was shredded. No exit package, no consulting contract, not even a farewell post on LinkedIn. Just silence. The CFO quietly resigned 2 days later, citing personal reasons. The rumor mill said he'd been the one who failed to disclose my veto clause to the acquirers. Maybe true, maybe not. Didn't matter. They'd all been complicit in erasing the people who built the place, and now the erasure had come for them. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. Instead, I brewed a pot of coffee in my tiny kitchen, the same way I had on the morning after every late-night crisis this company had put me through. Old habits die hard. The difference was this time, there was peace instead of panic. My phone buzzed. An email from the board chair. A short, formal note thanking me for my measured professionalism and continued commitment to ethical corporate governance. Attached was a PDF, the finalized board resolution containing the 3 clauses I'd fought for. My eyes lingered on one line near the end. Acknowledgement of Ms. Carter's exceptional contributions to the company's foundation and longevity. I read it twice. For once, it was written in ink that couldn't be erased.